first 6 or 7 slides. I'll start off by saying the industry has a huge challenge ahead of it. As you're all aware, the industry continues to grow each year with proportion with the economy. The exception of that, of course, is when we get a big recession or a downturn due to something like COVID, but generally the industry always recovers from that and continues on the trajectory. Each year IR produces a report in about June, in the month of June, summarising what happened in the previous year. That summary includes the number of passengers boarded on commercial flights, number of commercial flights performed, the fuel consumed, and consequently the CO2 produced. And if you look at the historical data that ARDA produces, you'll see that the average rate of compound annual growth between 2004 and 2019 averages about 4.65%, which means you get it doesn't only takes 15 years for traffic or passenger numbers to more than double. And of course, with that, you get an increase in the size of fleet, and you get the increase in the quantity of fuel consumed. Just to summarise, in 2019, the industry consumed 96 billion gallons of kerosene, but that risen to 99 billion gallons in 2024, having recovered from COVID. And for this year, the whole of this year is forecast to be 103 billion gallons. And of course, that correlates to about 1.25 gigatons, or 1,225 million tons. Now, of course, the industry has to take its responsibility to get its CO2 emissions down. Under the Paris Accords, the industry's emissions are allowed to peak in 10 years' time, but then it's got to start declining again. And the original target for 2050 was CO2 emissions of just 250 to 400 megatons, clearly of a small fraction of what they are this year, and an even smaller fraction of what they're likely to be in 2035. However, 2021, that target was then changed to an absolute figure of absolute zero, which many feel a bit cynical about being able to achieve. The point here is, though, that the larger the peak we reach in 2035, the larger the annual reduction has to be each year for the next 15 years to 2050. And as I was saying, we have a conflict because already historically, since the industry began really in 1945-46, the passenger numbers increase exponentially, as does the fuel consumed, as does the CO2 emissions emitted. Although we have had, of course, a continuous improvement in fuel burn efficiency because of the steady modernisation of aircraft, the continual, I should say, modernisation of aircraft and the overall fleet. This slide here gives you a sort of fairly, a good example of typical aircraft size. The majority of the fleet is short-haul, narrow-body. Over a 50-year period following the introduction of the 727-200, we've had the MD-81, and then the next generation A320-200, and then the A320neo, together with the 737 MAX family. And over that sort of 50-year period, sort of 4 generations, we've roughly halved fuel burn per seat. But that's still not enough to offset, obviously, the fleet growth and an increase in passenger numbers. Last 10 years, I've been at various conferences, I've spoken to lots of people, I've read lots of articles. There's all sorts of technologies that have been proposed to find an alternative fuel or propulsion system, or both. People talk about electric-powered aircraft, fuel cell powertrain, and hydrogen, and so on. And as time progresses, it seems more and more likely that the big winner is going to be sustainable aviation fuels. That seems to be the only real plausible option at the moment for aircraft that are passenger aircraft at 150 seats or bigger. The problem is, of course, the production of SAF is starting from a very small base. As of 2 years ago, projections were that current 2023 levels of production would have to be increased by 5,000 times to meet demand of that would be the demand the industry would have for the entire fleet in 2050. That in turn requires up to $125 billion of investment in infrastructure to build all these different SAF plants, and then there's still the issue of source material and what the end fuel would cost and how that would compare to current Jet A1. Another factor, of course, is that not all SAFs are net zero anyway. So there are a lot of big question marks over reaching these targets of 2050. So that brings us to deltaBurn, which is going to be going into a lot more detail when I finish this slide by Sander de Moor. deltaBurn is providing a very simple technology via modification for current generation engines, which significantly reduces fuel burn and other cash DOCs. It also enhances the aircraft's operating performance and revenue generating capacity, and it can be applied to the aircraft in a very short time, and it can be applied to all types of conventional propulsion, propellers and turbofan engine blades alike. It's also field type agnostic. So Sander is now going to explain in far more detail the deltaBurn project. Sander.
So, you want to introduce yourself, Sander, or I can do it? If you look in the notes on the website, it's very interesting. Sander de Moor is an investor, board member and general management of deltaBurn, a Singapore-based company, and Sander brings, apart from a very big personality and lots of fun, 4 decades of flight operations support with roles across many aero company profiles, areas of operation, climates and cultures, and in most areas of flight and ground operations. So the last 2 decades brought all of that together in deep airline fuel and operational efficiency expertise. So Sander is managing this exciting startup, which he's about to tell you about, with significant fuel burn reductions and emissions improvements. So Sander, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you all for staying this late on the second day, which is not the usual size of crowd that we see. It's very nice, thank you. Thank you for being here for my next 20 minutes of fame. Many of you have seen the outrageous advertising that I put out at the 1/3 fuel burn reduction that we talk about. And I start this slide with double digit, which isn't just another way of saying it's a lot. So who are we, deltaBurn? We're an R&D company, basically. We do aero fluid dynamics, and not only that, we also try to bring this to market, so we do STCs. We are registered in Singapore, and we have legal entities around the world where we do STC work. Our main base of operations today is in Phoenix, the airport of Deer Valley, where we have one of our aircraft that we use for test flying. So what do we exactly do? We do modifications to fan blades and propellers, but also to rotor blades. So any propulsion disc is something that we would like to play with. What are we trying to do? And this is looking into what Charles opened up with, is we try to drastically lower aviation emissions, because we, like many others, see that we're not doing that well. The scorecard of this industry in getting greener, it's not looking very good compared to the timelines that the world has given us. So we think we have a solution that will go quite a long way towards making a step change. It's not the end result, it's not the total solution, but it will help significantly. And by doing so, we will also support the scaling of SAF. SAF, which was also mentioned as probably the biggest change towards CO2 neutrality. As we know, scaling SAF is very difficult, and I think we can help with that because we can lower that mountain of SAF that is going to be required, making it more reachable. What are our objectives? The famous 1/3, the 33%. It's a huge number, and we'll get to talk about that. But that's what we're aiming for. Global aviation fuel burn reduction. So not just the airliners, but of course also the business jets, the turboprops, and even, if you want to push it that far, the little Cessna 172. And by doing so, we reduce those global emissions by 1/3, which by the way is 1% of the total CO2 around the world. 110 billion US gallons. It's just another number. You know, we've seen 103 in the previous presentation. It's 110 as far as IATA is concerned, but then IATA only represents 80% of the airlines around the world, or the traffic around the world. So the number is likely to be quite a bit higher. We actually personally think it's around 125, 130 billion US gallons, which produces around 1.4 gigatons of CO2, give or take, which is 3.6 of the global output expected for this year, 39, which means that if we can reduce it by 1/3, it's more than 1%. Now, the other thing about this is that the slice of pie in the whole CO2 balance that aviation represents is increasing, because other industries are getting greener faster. So the CO2 slice the pizza slice of aviation CO2 is growing over time. All the more reason to do something about it. The last thing that we do with reducing fuel burn so much is increasing range of current aircraft by up to 50%. That's the nice additional effect if you're able to reduce fuel burn that way. The big elephant in the room, 33%. How do we get there? So I'm showing you a slice through of a jet engine, and this is where we do basically the magic. As you can see, the air enters from the front, it's being sucked in by the big fan that you see, the black part, and then a little bit of it goes into the core of the engine, and a large part of it goes around the core into the bypass duct, where we have a certain mass flow and we have a certain exhaust velocity. That is your thrust of the jet engine. So far, no surprises. Our technology purely focuses on the fan disc itself, the propulsion disc. So we increase the efficiency of that disc. Now, how we do that is still a little bit under wraps, but what we do is we drastically change the airflow around the fan blades. And in doing so, we create some really interesting secondary effects, which result in much more mass flow through the bypass duct and a lot more exhaust velocity. And this is signified by the larger red arrow. Now what that means is, because we have more mass flow and more exhaust velocity, because we changed the fan, we have a lot more thrust. So now your 32,000 pound engine is producing a lot more thrust, which on the face of it is a great idea, except the bearings in the engine don't like it that much, and possibly the engine pylons don't like it that much if you start to pull a lot more. So what this actually means is, if you power back a bit, you can actually fly with the same thrust, but now at a lot lower fuel burn. And that's actually what we're doing. That's the trick. We make the fan more efficient, we get more bypass flow, and because of that we can bring the power back and get the same thrust with less fuel burn. Now, there is a whole string of benefits attached to this. We have permanently derated engines, much lower operating temperatures. On a typical flight we see 100 degrees less EGT, much lower stresses in your engines, much lower fuel burn, which we will come to see, less noise, takeoff and landing, And there are much higher safety margins because that extra thrust, if you want it to be available in a single engine situation just after takeoff or just before landing, the flight crew will have that extra thrust available. So it increases safety margins in that particular respect, but also during normal operations, because the engine isn't stressed as much as it normally is. But the biggest thing is this: when we reduce fuel burn by so much, we reduce the emissions by so much as well. And not just the CO2, but because we run less fuel, we also produce less water, which means less contrails, which is also a topic of interest today. Our NOx is cut by around 50% because we run the engines at lower temperatures. So there are a whole string of benefits. Now, magic. Nope. We call it real science, and the patent office seems to agree. We have flight tested this many times, we have demonstrated this many times, and I will show you a demonstration in just a few seconds. The effect that we do on the engines is actually a bit similar to this without the noise and the light show. But we see over 50% more thrust at altitude and at speed. And that's about the same amount of thrust that you really lose after takeoff. An engine, actually a jet engine with the fixed blade propeller at the front, where the fan is, loses about 50% of thrust all the way up to flight level. And we basically give a lot of that back. What I'm going to show you is a 737 clip. We modified one engine on this aircraft. We modified the left engine. And what you're going to see is a takeoff. It's working. Of note is that the left engine, before we modified it, was burning hotter and more fuel than the other engine. And I'll talk you through that a little bit later. So what we see here is the pilot push forward the throttles, but he's doing so in a staggered way. And he's running it up. He's trying to aim for equal thrust with the right engine more throttle and the left engine less throttle, because that modified engine is producing more thrust already. Then comes the moment he pushes the clock on the left, which is when the takeoff run starts. There we go. And then in the instrument just right above it, you can see the airspeed coming alive right now. So he's holding his hand on and off the throttle because he's looking for that sweet spot to have both engines producing the same thrust. And the airplane is tracking straight along the runway. One thing you notice is the vibration meter just above the throttles on the left is quite high. It's just under 2. On previous flights, before we modified the engine, it was almost 5. So this is a perfect example of how we lower vibration in the engine as well. Airplane is flying, gear came up, and what you see on the left is, you can clearly see a lower N1, and the fuel flow on the left is lower as well. Not as significant as the numbers I've been using. You'll see that in a minute. And this test flight was about a year ago. So what I did is I took a snapshot later in the flight, and now we're going through flight level 250. We're in climb, and you can see that the throttles are obviously at a stagger, and if I bring that out, it looks like this. Left N1 is about 8.5% down. The EGT on the dials is 90 degrees difference, but remember that the left one was initially running hotter, so the real difference is 112 degrees. But the biggest change is the fuel flow, which on the dials has a 25% delta, but add those 5% that the engine was running more before, we're looking at 30%. So this is, I have to call it proof because I took the picture myself. There's nothing fake about it. 30% lower fuel burn of a 737 Classic in flight. This translates to a 737 Classic flying better, more economical than a 737 MAX. Now, just let that sink in. Yeah, two-generational leap. The other thing I mentioned earlier was the 50% increase in range, which is an effect of a much lower fuel burn. Now, how does that translate to a real-world situation? Let's say we have a classic A321, a CEO. That airplane has a range of around, 2,300 miles if you take a 21-ton payload. If you modify that aircraft with our modifications, you get an airplane that does over 50% more, which is 3,600 miles. Now that becomes a very interesting airplane because it's only 10% away from the current range of the 321 long range, right? So with a very easy change to the aircraft, you create an airplane that is doing magic. Taking that same line of thinking a little bit further, if you look at the typical A380, burning, as we know, a lot of gas, like doing it during around 4,500 hours a year, maybe even 5,000 hours. For the example, it doesn't really matter that much. And that fuel burn could be 12.5 tons, it could be 12 tons. It depends on how the aircraft is used with that fuel price. Then operating that one airplane per year will set you back around $39–40 million. And it will produce 170,000 tons of CO2. Now, put the aircraft in an A-check, because what we do to the engine can be done within an A-check. And now we have 4 adjusted engines, and we have a thing called the deltaBurn effect, which is a third reduction in fuel, a third reduction in cost, and all the other benefits that we talked about before. Now, if I were one of the owners of this aircraft, I would maybe pay attention. In addition, all the other effects that we just talked about. Taking this one example to another next level would be this. It's a nice picture, by the way. Project Sunrise in Australia. At the moment, the A350-1000 ULR is the aircraft earmarked for this operation with a special cabin configuration designed to have people survive for 21 hours in an airplane with limited space. If you take this particular aircraft and you would mimic that cabin for the A380, so the same, let's say, balance between first and business and premium economy and economy, you would end up with something like this. 372 people rather than the 238 sitting in the A350, but you can still add 15 tons of cargo and make it all the way to London out of Sydney. So a 58-ton payload on this beast will mimic what the A350 will be doing soon. And don't forget that this is an otherwise standard A380. All we did was modify those engines. How does it look on a flight plan? It looks like this. So in this particular case, I've used a 20-knot headwind that you might have on average from Australia to Europe. And we're looking at a 23-hour flight. Now, I'm not sure if you, like me, would survive sitting in an airplane for 23 hours, but it sure is this possibility. And those are indeed eye-watering numbers. So we've used this term before, the A380neo. Somebody else has used this term as well for many years, and Airbus decided not to do it. We are, in a way, capable of doing this, of giving the world this, except we're not going to call it an A380neo. We will call it an A380 deltaBurn. But it certainly is a possibility. And all I'm asking anybody with an A380 is just give us one for 6 months, we'll do the STC, and we'll show you how it works. We don't have the cash to buy one ourselves, so that's the issue. Where are we today? And that's a big question. We do not have the jet engine STC yet. We are a privately funded organization. We do not have the millions that we need to buy a CRJ or a 737 and do the STC. What we do have is enough money to do the STC for a turboprop. And that's why we acquired this Merlin, which is our test bed, which is parked in Arizona, in Deer Valley Airport, that we use for our STC for the turboprop, which we hope to complete by the first quarter of next year. We developed some really interesting tech. For one, we wanted to know exactly how much thrust these engines and propeller combinations are producing. And we looked around, but we couldn't find anything to satisfy our needs. So we built our own test rig, test station. It looks like this. It's basically a chain with some strain gauges, and we measure very accurately, digitally, how much the gear is being pulled forward by whatever power setting we're doing. So now we can actually perfectly match the amount of thrust being produced by the engine-propeller combination and the amount of torque that we set in the aircraft to reach that thrust. And it looks something like this. What you see here is a typical run up and run down. So we start with ground idle, then we go up to flight idle, and we go all the way up to maximum power, which for this particular day was a certain value, and then we bring the setting down to 0 again. We just wanted to see what the correlation is between torque and thrust. So left image is unmodified, right image is modified. And the thing that jumps out automatically is that the right engine is doing much better. On this particular day, we reached a maximum thrust of 1,860 pounds on the particular combination at a torque of 1908 foot-pounds. The modified engine reached that same thrust at a much, much lower torque of only 1,044 foot-pounds because of the modifications on the propeller. Pushing it all the way up to maximum power, the maximum we achieved was 2,260 pounds, but only at 1,500 foot-pounds. So still much, much less than what the left engine needed to squeeze to get to that thrust. So the equal thrust condition that we reach on this aircraft, we reach it at 45% less torque. Now that is a number that nobody would believe unless they saw it with their own eyes. The other thing is the maximum thrust is 21% more than the standard engine, but still at almost 20% less torque. So how does it all come together for a roadmap? As we said, we're doing the internally funded STC at this time. We hope to bring this STC to market in the first quarter of next year. Doing that, we'll put the fan STC, the first one, within reach, because out of that first STC, we hope to generate the revenues to be able to go to the market and buy that little airplane and do the STC. Unless, of course, something else happens. Unless, of course, an airline says, hey, you can use our airplane. Or, hey, here's a bag of money. But until that time, we have to do it this way. We will get there eventually. I mean, I have been on too many test flights to ignore this. I cannot say that it doesn't exist. And once you see this, you cannot unsee this, right? So we will get there. What we like to do is get there much faster than our current roadmap, because the world will just have to wait 1-2 more years until we're ready, right? It's about 9 months for the first STC for the jets, because every authority, FAA, EASA, they don't really like you playing with engines, major parts of the airplane. They really want to see that everything is done right. But subsequent STCs will go faster. We're targeting about 50 STCs, 50 airframe engine combinations, and then at the end of that, after about 5 years, we hope to have modified each and every airplane on this planet. Right? Happy snap of our team. Here we are in a engine test cell. This is in the UK half a year ago. We talked to the TC holder, the owner of the LF507 engine. CFS is the company, to do a test. We wanted to have some proper test cell data as well. And they were very happy to work with us, and we went ahead. We modified the engine right there in the test cell, and we did a number of runs. Now, the red circle, the person in that red circle is the CEO of our company, Peter Ireland, also the inventor of this technology. He was there, of course. The gentleman that is in the red circle now is an ex-Rolls-Royce Trent program director who was there as an independent observer. And the third gentleman in the red dot is, the red circle, is another independent observer, a certifying verification engineer for EASA, who came also to independently observe and testify to the results of the test. And the fourth gentleman, the one with the big camera, you might recognize him from sitting right here, another independent observer who witnessed what we were doing.
Yeah. We both
Yeah.
and that was a basic version, that was 25%.
Well, not entirely.
Okay.
So what happened here, in the test cell, the engine was not set up properly. It didn't have the outside cowlings, it was just a fan. And of course, a large part of our effect is, what happens in the bypass duct. So what we reached on this particular test, after our modification work, which took like an hour, we reached 10.45%. Now for us, the 10.45%, call it 10%, was a real disappointment because that's not what we're used to seeing. But for the Rolls-Royce gentleman and the other engineer, they fell off their chairs. They had never seen anything like this, especially not from a modification that didn't take the billions that Rolls-Royce just dumped into their latest engines to make it 1% better. Now, this was done within an hour on an engine, and the results were right there. So even though we were disappointed with the setup and the results, it's still a testament to the enormous potential of this technology. Which is leading to the MOU for the first fan STC. So we're in final negotiations right now with an operator to do the 146 STC with us. And this is a direct result of us working with that engine type certificate holder who made this call. For this particular operator, the big change we're going to make for them is actually twofold. They do a lot of tech stops today. They fly in the Arctic, long-range operations, but this airplane is not really suited for it. So we will actually give them a lot of direct flying. And the other thing is safer operations. Because of our modifications, the engines turn slower. There's less effect with icing, both on ground and in the air. So by now, you sort of can expect that we will bring this to market, and you might wonder, so how is this going to look to you, the operators? What's it going to look like? We will lease our STCs to you, operators. You don't have to put money up front, you don't have to buy the technology, we will lease it to you. We will do invoicing from verified savings, so just like you do with your fuel efficiency programs and with your FOCA programs, you'll share some data with us, and based on that we will invoice you. Because we will invoice you out of your savings. The product will be installed by us, and like I mentioned before, this fits within a standard A-check. The 737 flight that you saw on screen, we modified that left engine in 38 minutes. We took 1 minute per blade. And then you get the results that you saw. Now, that was a temporary modification. It wasn't designed to last, it was just there for the demo. The STC level product that we put on has a life from C-check to C-check. We also do the camo. Based on the data we get from your organization, we know how well the installations are performing. And like I said, the design life is the C-check interval, or better. We don't know yet. We haven't tested it yet all the way to the end of the first C-check. At the end of all of that, deltaBurn is a very interesting company. What we have is disruptive technology. I think that's the right word to use. One thing we try to avoid at all costs is somebody taking control of this technology and possibly warping the market by excluding one OEM at the cost of the other OEM, etc. So that's one thing that drives us, and because of this unique structure as a private company without diluting ownership, we're not the easiest to invest in, but any airline with an airplane is welcome. That concludes my presentation. There's two things I would like to add to this. One word is green mouthing. Now, we all know the word greenwashing. There are many airlines and other actors in this industry who like to talk about making the industry greener, but it doesn't appear to happen much at this time. We talk to many airlines and we talk to many other organizations like IATA, like OEMs, etc. But after the initial shock wears off in the discussions and after we explain exactly what we're doing, it becomes very silent. For some reason, nobody wants to take the next step and say, you know what, that is great, we're going to help you. Yeah, it hasn't happened yet. So green mouthing is something that we entertain almost on a daily basis. What I would like to see is a lot more green doing, and you know, one can only hope. A few months ago, we were talking to NASA about another topic, and one of the steering committee members came up with this quote. He actually said that our work could well be the largest step change in aviation emissions reductions of this century, right? And with that quote, I'd like to leave you. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm here as long as they allow me, and otherwise I'm outside to take more questions.
Well, thank you, Sander. We do actually have 4 questions in the app, so
go ahead.
The one's from me. Where do you see the various journeys towards net zero? I guess you kind of answered it, but given the recent major changes in political emphasis, will this help your project? I would have thought it would.
It would. Well, first of all, we stand for a 1/3 reduction in current emissions, right? That's only 1/3. I mean, the other 2/3 will have to come from other initiatives in the industry, be it a complete change in propulsion to SAF, as far as we can create SAF fast enough, etc. If governments or governing bodies would say, well, you know, industry, you're not moving fast enough, we want you to look closer at, say, deltaBurn, that might actually shift the focus a bit. But other than that, I think it's going to be business as usual, and whatever the industry comes up with is the best we can hope for.
Yeah, I spent most of my early life doing payload range curves for 111s, 146s, so I can validate the kind of improvements that come from fuel efficiencies. Arthur Leckman, the captain dispatch coordinator at Azul in Brazil, how could you confirm that a lower N1 could produce the same thrust apart from the neutral trims? I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, well, we deduced that actually. The only way that the lower N1 can produce the same thrust, and the same thrust is proven in the test flight because the airplane was flying neutral straight without trim, is because we have increased the mass flow and the exhaust velocity of the engine. So what we actually did, if you look at an N1 curve on a graph, it's for most of the graph it's a fairly flat line, and then in the last 10-15% the line goes up pretty quick. Same with the fuel flow line. What we've done actually is we've moved that line to the left. So you go left in the graph horizontally and you reach the new line of where we are. And that's the same thrust, because we fly with equal thrust. We don't have a huge foot on one pedal to make the airplane go straight. So that's the answer I would give here.
Okay, two anonymous questions. What are you changing on the fan blades? Is it changing the angle or the surface texture or something else?
We do something additive. We stick something on the blade in a very crude way, put it that way. But what it does, because of its shape and its configuration, it drastically changes the airflow around the blade. And what we do is we get rid of shock waves, we get rid of choking, and we have much higher mass flow. That's what we do. Now the details, of course, that's where the devil is. Once the patent is out, you can read all about it. At the moment, we're still patent pending.
Okay, and the final one in the app. Are engine manufacturers engaged? I'm assuming they would want their engine to be the most efficient so they could sell them to airlines.
Right. We're not dealing directly with engine OEMs at this time. For one, there is a lot of sensitivity around one engine manufacturer having a big leg, a big foot over the other one, and we don't want that to happen. I think in the end, once this technology is flying, we will license it to engine OEMs out there, because they will want to develop their next engine, their next propulsion systems, and would like to integrate this technology straight away. That can be done, but for now it will remain an STC.
So thank you very much indeed, Sander, and I'm sure you'll provoke a lot of attention and questions in the hallway.
I hope so. Thanks.
Okay, to close the meeting, I'm going to introduce Craig McFarlane, the